in public. And even as you mentioned, the pornography industry exists for a long time. It's first in writing,
Right.
then it's in imagery. Then when the camera comes along, it's in photography. So you get dirty magazines, right? These
Right.
underground that get passed around. This segues into, I can imagine this must have exploded during the time of bootlegging, that while people are having speakeasies where things are going on that are illegal and underground and not to be right, not to be seen. And notice that part of the attraction to it is that it is forbidden, right?
Yep. Yep.
And
And that's
so
still today.
I imagine too that that was kind of the way pornography felt in the world for the ancient Greeks and for the ancient Romans. But notice that that kind of depiction of sexuality and even that behavior would have been reserved to the elite. Does that make
Got it.
sense? They're the
Yes.
ones who can afford to commission an artist to do that, right? Somebody's got to do it and they got to be good at it. So porn is going to be so called. It wouldn't have been called that then, but that's what it is. We recognize that's what it is. Would have been reserved for a very, very narrow slice of the population. And then notice that two things happen. You have the invention of writing, which democratizes the word, right? Literacy explodes. And when literacy explodes, all of our aristocratic forms in the West government begin to fall. They haven't all fallen.
Right.
But it's not a surprise to me that the development of writing accelerates the demise of the feudal and the tribal order, top-down order, and democracy is birthed out of writing. Because now the official truth is no longer the province of the elite alone. So,
Okay.
like you noticed during the revolution, what was Benjamin Franklin? He was a printer.
Exactly.
Common sense, which was the very first call revolution, was by a printer. Why? Because he possesses the mechanical means to duplicate the word and disseminate it through non-official means, which is what the internet has been for a long time. And you can see why the elites are fighting to control the internet because information has exploded. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that the explosion of democracy, which most people would say is a very positive development, would have a parallel explosion of the ubiquity of porn in our culture because that belongs to the same underground that now is coming to the surface, right? And
Right.
so, it used to be that porn was this forbidden thing, and then it becomes more and more available, and theaters are devoted to it. It's like oh yeah, they show movie. I don't know what kind of movies they show in there, right?
Right.
And then in the 1960s and I think the 70s, you've got the development of the shoot. There used to be this franchise that sold walnut bowls, among other things. It might be a diner. They'd have candy. They had a little shop, and they advertised walnut bowls. And I remember these. They went out of business in the 70s, but in the early 80s, I started noticing that every one of those defunct little businesses was at an exit out in the middle of nowhere on a highway, and behind there would be this building that didn't have a sign on it, and that was like the porn place. That was where you went and got your pornographic magazines. That's where
Right.
you could the truckers would stop there. You know what I mean? And they were always on the outskirts of town. So yeah, the acceleration comes in the 60s and especially the 70s as a result of the sexual revolution at the end of the 60s, right? And a new sort of attitude about about everything when it comes to sexuality and marriage and divorce. You'll notice if you study the law that the idea of alimony and even palimony is a 1970s development. Um, uh, Lee Marvin, for instance, was in a long-term relationship with a woman out in California for 20, 25 years, and then they split up. She was the first one to successfully argue in court that she deserved the same kind of support from him that a married woman would.
Hmm.
Uh, and she won, and that changed the laws all over the country. At the same time, you start to see that porn it starts to come out of the shadows in increments. It's secret and illegal at first, then it's illegal and not so secret. Magazines start to proliferate, but notice how it's consumed. You have to order them. They're through the mail. They come in brown paper, sacks that are not labeled. And then, of course, film is accelerating.
Right.
It in culture. The sexual revolution changes what is acceptable to be shown on film. And then you get the famous Hustler case in the 1970s regarding pornography itself, with the famous Supreme Court decision that, it is a matter of free speech. And if adults want to consume it, it's allowed, right? Where before that, the question was asked, what is pornographic? And I think one of the Supreme Court justices, can't remember the name. The answer was, well, I don't know, but I know it when I see it.
I've heard
right?
that. Yeah, I've heard that quote.
Right. And once the Hustler case happens, it definitely becomes something that it's like, okay, it's here. And then you start to see Playboy magazine, Hustler magazine, Penthouse magazines appearing behind the counter at stores, right? There being sections. Once the VHS is developed, after Laserdisc was the first one, and then Beta, and then VHS.
You might need to help me out with that one. Laserdisc.
Anyway, yeah, Laserdisc. They looked like albums. They were as albums, and they were yeah, and Beta far better than VHS tape. But the reason VHS became the norm is because it's much more cheaply made. The quality's worse, but it's easier to duplicate, right?
Interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, so now you're going to see the beginning of the death of theaters, right? People aren't going to have to Pee Wee Herman it up and go to a theater with a bunch of other degenerates in long trench coats and sort of try to disguise their identities as they're walking in, because now you can go to a video store and there's a back room behind a curtain, and you have to be 21 years old or older to get in there. And all you got to worry about is whether your neighbor Marge is looking when you slip through the curtain, and then when you come out.
So there's still that level though of like anonymity.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to go out in public. You got to go out and kind of work for it.